Hello, my name is Richard Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about belief in injustice and tragedy. This comes from a quote of one of my favorite books that my wife introduced me to. It's called Illusions by Richard Bach. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's kind of a spiritual fiction, but it's kind of a master and disciple story in a way. But at one point, the master says, "The mark of your ignorance is the depth of your belief in injustice and tragedy." Injustice and tragedy are fictions. And I know some may have almost a visceral reaction to hearing this, where it's like, how could you say that? And you can start naming off all the injustices or tragedies of the world. But let's look at this from non-duality, from the point of one who has realized the truth, that there is no other. From that viewpoint, where would there be injustice? Injustice is typically what should not have been, what should not have happened, is not right. In a nutshell, that's basically what it's saying, is this shouldn't be. It's an injustice. Because everything should be just. Now, there's two issues with this. One, it's a resistance against reality. It's a resistance against what is. Because you're saying what is should be other than it is. But the second thing is there justice is derived from actually a manga that I had read, put it kind of interesting as, it's part of the human delusion. It was called the human delusion, but basically any substantially, complex, evolved, highly thinking being could fall prey to these diseases of the mind or delusions. And there's several, but one of them is justice. Because justice is typically only applies to humans, and particularly it's about self-interest. It is because, frankly, the universe isn't following a system of justice. We think it should. We would like to think it should. We feel better if we think the world is just. But justice is a social convention to basically get us to work together better. Because we talk about justice typically only in terms of humans. We don't talk about the injustices between or done to cows. Although there are vegetarians and Hindus, for example, that will point out and say these are the injustices done to cows. But typically, I would say the most average person isn't thinking about the injustices done to animals of different kinds, or insects. Look at the injustices we've done to insects. Say bees, for example. Bees are dying off almost to a critical level where there won't be enough to pollinate everything. And what brings this about? A lot of researchers said it's the insecticides we use. We've screwed up the environment. But they've somehow obscured the evidence, and so no one's held accountable, and we still keep using these insecticides. No one talks about the injustices done to the environment, the animals, the insects, the plants. No, we typically talk about justice in terms of human terms. And that's why it's purely a social convention. It's a set of rules and ideas that we agree to live by. And if someone breaks it, we call it an injustice. But it's made up. The world is not fair. The universe is not fair. We have this illusion of justice and fairness, but that only applies amongst our community, amongst humans. It's a social convention, agreed rules that we have agreed to, but the world itself, the universe, is not fair, is not just. There is nothing balancing the books and making sure it's all fair and just. So that's the second part. But like I said, the first part is it's a deliberate resisting denial of what is. What is shouldn't be. This should not be. It's not just. It's an injustice. Same with tragedy. Tragedy is just another way to say, this is wrong. This is so wrong. And so you're describing what is as wrong. It should not be. And that's why it's a tragedy. But from the point of view of one who has realized the self, who has realized there's no other, there is nothing wrong. Wrongness is a decision made by personal preference. I don't like how this is, therefore it's wrong. But it's a resisting and denial of reality. It is what it is. And so if a tsunami, due to an earthquake under the ocean, happens and takes out an island, yeah, they could show all this news, say how tragic it is, but it is as it is. I mean, you could feel compassion for them. You can go, hey, if I can do something to help, go ahead and help. But there isn't the same visceral resistance saying no to this. It should not be, or this somehow is wrong. And so I find this quote out of Illusions quite profound. Probably one of the best lines I think out of the entire book. As a single line. Basically paraphrasing it would be, the measure of your ignorance is the depth of your belief in tragedy and injustice. So as long as you are deeply convinced that things are tragic and things are unjust, it's just showing there's ignorance. You are not seeing the truth of reality, which for non-duality is there's just Brahman, there's just self. There is no right and wrong. You don't pick parts of Brahman saying, well, these are the right parts and these are the wrong parts. Why would you do that? It's not separate. It's not two. It's like taking a single orange and saying, that part's right, that part's wrong. Why? How can you make that distinction of saying one part's right or one part's wrong? On what basis are you claiming something's right or wrong? And if you look at that basis, it's self-preferential. It's wrong for me. It might be right for others. It might be right for the environment. I mean, even if you had an orange and you said, well, this rotten part is wrong. Well, not for the bacteria and the things that eat on things like that. They're having a great time. They think it's right. And so this whole idea of, well, this is right, this is wrong, doesn't apply when you're talking about a single thing. You can't take a single thing and try to splice it in that way. And so if you're just saying all there is self, all there is Brahman, right and wrong don't really apply. Those are decisions made on a mental level based on self-preference. Things are just as they are. Neither right, neither wrong. They just are. They are. Arguing about it isn't going to change anything. And so you don't have that sense of wrongness with reality, with the world, with what's happening. Not to say that there can't be compassion, like I said. I mean, if there's something going on that, injustice, fairness is an illusion, but at the same time, you could still want the well-being. It's not a matter of justice or fairness. It's just wanting well-being for others. And so if you see others being taken advantage of, or in some way suffering that you could help, you could still have compassion for that and work towards remedying the situation. You don't have to deem the situation as an injustice or tragedy in order to act. You can just simply say, hey, things could be better for them, and so act, or wish for their well-being, or whatever. And so I'm not saying this is emotionless or cold or somehow detached from everything either. The whole idea is not to be a stone and be unaffected by the world. That's not the point. You can still look at what's going on and go, there's a lot of people hurting due to this. What can I do to alleviate it? It doesn't have to be about injustice. It doesn't have to be about unfairness. It doesn't have to be about tragedy. It's just, hey, this is what's happening, and just wanting to help. But we get stuck on these ideas of tragedy and injustice, and we really think they're true. And what you're really saying is parts of reality, parts of what is happening, should not be, should not exist, should never have been. And so that is ignorance. And so the depth of your feeling that things are wrong or should not be in reality or what has been is the mark of ignorance. And so you want to delve into this, because like I said, when I originally said, that the mark of ignorance is the depth of your belief in ignorance and illusion. That or not ignorance and illusion, but the belief in tragedy and injustice. When I originally said that, whatever visceral feeling might have came up in that moment of, hey, what about that stuff to look at? You need to see through that stuff. That stuff is where you're hanging up. That's the stuff that disturbs your peace, for example. So many people are like, oh, I'm looking for peace. How can I find peace? We're constantly disturbing our own peace by getting hung up on reality. And if you believe what is should not be, how could you ever be at peace? Peace only comes when you're at peace with what is and what was, as it's been and as it is. If you have any problem with anything that's happened, there is always a dispelling or mucking up of inner peace, because you just can't be at peace with what is and what was. You'll always have that hang up on reality, and it will disturb your peace. And you're like, oh, I can't find peace. I can't find peace. It's because you have a problem with what is and what was. And so you got to look at it and go, why am I so stuck on it? Why can't I be a little more loose with it? Not to say that, again, not to say you should, be cold or dismissive or aloof from it or ignore it or anything else. I'm not saying spiritually bypass it in some way. You still can see what is, accept what is as it is, and then go, I'm going to do something about it because I feel that I would like to help those in need. It doesn't have to revolve around some idea of justice or tragedy. So if you're looking, so when you feel those visceral, hey, what about, because I know this video will probably get comments, because I've done similar videos, not as blatant as this one, I think, but I've done several videos where I was kind of hinting at nothing is particularly wrong with what is. And inevitably, people will point out famines, wars, or something else that's going on in the world and say, how can you be all right with this happening? And I'm saying that's the point exactly. You are not at peace. You are unhappy and suffering. The world looks like a dark place because you're so fixated on this. Because you're so stuck on that it is happening. It is reality. It is reality. It's happening. And feeling that it shouldn't be isn't going to solve it. Having this, you sometimes hear the phrase righteous indignation, but basically that's not a mark of an enlightened person to have this resistance to what is, and that what is should be fought. We should be fighting against this stuff, because fighting against this stuff is not the way. Working with what is to resolve it is the way. Fighting just creates more conflict. But if you can work with the situation, well, in what way can I help resolve this? What channels are available? That would be wiser. But if you are coming from the standpoint of this should be fought, this should be resisted, that very attitude is why you're unhappy, anxious, depressed, not at peace, yada yada yada. That is the root of all your issues that you're trying to get over. And as long as you're holding on to that crap, you're never going to be at peace. You're never going to overcome suffering. It is this hang up against what is or what was. You have to be at peace with what is and what was in order to be at peace. And so, it's things to keep in mind. But, when we're talking about this, we're talking about the point of view post-enlightenment, after realization, the one who realizes the self, the one who realizes Brahman, self-realized, enlightened, awakened, whatever terms you want to pick. That viewpoint does not really see tragedy, does not really see injustice. Because that kind of negative, visceral reaction against what is and what was doesn't arise. And so, this is not a mark against you if you have a visceral reaction against it. If you have a great sense of injustice and tragedy in the world, don't take this as a knock on you. I'm not trying to belittle you if you've got this attachment. I'm just saying, if non-duality enlightenment is really what you're interested in, this is something you got to look at and get over. Because as long as you're stuck on it, you can never come to terms with the self, Brahman, ultimate reality. Because that truth is, there is no tragedy, there is no injustice. Because there's only the self. And so you can't pick one part saying this part is good and this part is bad. It's just one not undifferentiated. Undifferentiated would be the incorrect term. It's undivided, one undivided thing. There is differentiation. Because some bodies are sick, some bodies are healthy, some places are at war, some places are at peace. There's differentiation. I'm not saying there isn't that, but what I'm saying is it's undivided. It's one thing. And in that one thing, trying to split it up and saying this part is good, this part's bad, this part's just, this part's injustice, this part's tragic, this part's not tragic, is ridiculous. It's one thing. And from that point of view, you gotta let go of that kind of differentiation in terms of judging and saying no and repelling the happenings of what is and what was. Because as long as you fight reality, you're not, it's a losing game. Reality always wins in the end. You have to come to terms with what is. You have to come to terms with what was. You can't change it. All you can do is act going forward and have a potentially different future. But you can't change what is and what was. What is as it is. And so I'm just saying, something to look into. But if you've got any questions, comments, please post below. Until next time, thank you much.